Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when nobody is watching. Sometimes a single act of kindness can change two lives forever. Nico Alvarez runs a small auto shop where he fixes cars and barely makes ends meet. When an expensive SUV breaks down at his garage, he meets a young boy in a wheelchair and his well-dressed mother. The mechanic treats the child with patience and respect, showing him how engines work and letting him help with the repairs. What Nico doesn't know is that this woman isn't just any mother. She's watching every gesture, every word, every moment of genuine care he shows her son. She's about to make a decision that will turn his ordinary life upside down. But first, she needs to see if his kindness is real or just an act. What happens when someone with unlimited power witnesses true compassion? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weathered toolbox sat on the workbench, exactly where his father had left it 15 years ago. Every morning, Nico Alvarez ran his fingers along its scratched metal surface before opening it to begin another day. Inside, tools worn smooth by decades of honest work lay in perfect order, each wrench, each screwdriver positioned precisely as Miguel Alvarez had taught his son. The old man's voice still echoed in the garage. "Tools don't make the mechanic, Mijo. Heart does." Nico understood that lesson better with each passing year. At 38, he'd inherited more than just a small auto repair shop on Maple Street. He'd inherited a philosophy, a way of treating people that his father had lived by until his final breath. The shop might be modest 3 bays, oil stains on the concrete floor, and a hand-painted sign that needed touching up, but it was built on something more valuable than expensive equipment: reputation. The morning sun filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across the cluttered workspace. Nico pulled on his blue coveralls, the same shade his father had worn, and tied back his graying hair. His reflection in the cracked mirror above the small sink showed a man who looked older than his years. 15 years of crawling under cars, lifting heavy parts, and breathing in exhaust fumes had carved lines around his eyes and calloused his hands beyond recognition. But there was something else in that reflection, a quiet dignity that came from knowing his place in the world. He wasn't ashamed of the grease under his fingernails or the ache in his lower back that greeted him each morning. This was honest work, work that mattered. When Mrs. Patterson's old sedan refused to start on a cold morning, Nico was the one who got her to her job at the hospital. When the Rodriguez family's van broke down with 3 kids in car seats, Nico made sure they got home safely. The neighborhood had changed around him over the years. Young families moved in, drawn by affordable rent and tree-lined streets. Some of the old-timers had passed away or moved to retirement homes, but the heart of the community remained. People still looked out for each other here. They still brought Nico homemade tamales at Christmas and invited him to quinceañeras and graduation parties. His own family had grown smaller. His mother, Elena, lived in the small apartment above the shop, her arthritis making the stairs more challenging each year. The medical bills for her treatment had been mounting, eating away at the shop's modest profits. Nico never mentioned the financial pressure to her. At 72, she'd earned the right to worry about nothing more serious than her telenovelas and Sunday Mass. The first customer of the day arrived at 7:30 sharp. Pete Martinez had been bringing his work truck to the shop since Nico was still learning at his father's side. The old Ford needed new brake pads, routine work that would take an hour. Pete settled into the plastic chair beside the coffee pot and launched into his usual commentary about the baseball season. "The kid's got a good arm," Pete said, referring to his grandson's Little League games. "Reminds me of you at that age. You still got that trophy your papa was so proud of." Nico smiled, tightening the lug nuts on Pete's wheel. The trophy sat on a shelf in the office, collecting dust beside his father's last tax returns and a photo of the shop's grand opening in 1987. He'd been the pitcher for Lincoln Elementary, good enough to dream about the majors until reality set in. College scholarships required grades he couldn't maintain while helping in the shop after school. Professional baseball required time and money his family didn't have. But those dreams had faded without bitterness. Life had taught him that every path led somewhere worthwhile if you walked it with purpose. His purpose was here, in this neighborhood, with these people who trusted him with their transportation, their safety, their ability to get to work and feed their families. By noon, 3 more regulars had come and gone. Sarah Chen dropped off her Honda for an oil change and stayed to chat about her daughter's acceptance to nursing school. The Reverend Johnson brought his ancient Buick for its monthly inspection. More out of habit than necessity, the car ran like new thanks to Nico's careful maintenance. Maria Santos called from the bus stop, panicked because her car wouldn't start. Nico walked 6 blocks with his jumper cables, got her running, and refused payment because she was already late for her shift at the diner. This was his world. Small gestures that mattered more than grand ambitions. Fixed cars that carried people to jobs, to hospitals, to their children's school plays. He'd learned to measure success differently than most people, not in dollars accumulated or achievements displayed, but in problems solved, in trust earned, in the satisfaction of work done right. The afternoon brought a steady stream of familiar faces. Each customer had a story, a relationship built over years of honest service. Nico knew which cars needed extra attention, which owners stretched their budgets to afford repairs, which vehicles were held together more by hope than mechanical soundness. He worked with patience, born of experience, never rushing, never cutting corners. His father's voice guided him through each repair. Take time to do it right, or you'll take time to do it again. The old man had built his reputation one satisfied customer at a time, and Nico maintained it the same way. Word of mouth brought most of his business. People trusted Alvarez Auto Repair because Miguel Alvarez had earned that trust, and his son had proven worthy of carrying it forward. As the day wound down, Nico swept the shop floor and organized his tools. The familiar routine brought peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new opportunities to help his neighbors. The work might be repetitive, but it was never meaningless. Every car that left his shop carried a piece of his craftsmanship, his care, his commitment to excellence. Upstairs, his mother was preparing dinner. The smell of garlic and cumin drifted down through the floorboards. She'd ask about his day, and he'd tell her about the regular customers, the interesting repairs, the small victories that made the work worthwhile. He wouldn't mention the stack of bills on his desk, or the equipment that needed replacing, or the worry that kept him awake some nights. At 38, Nico Alvarez had made peace with his life. He wasn't rich, wasn't famous, would never see his name in newspapers or his face on television. But he was respected, needed, valued by people who mattered to him. His father's legacy lived on in every job completed with integrity, every customer treated with dignity, every day spent in honest labor. He had no way of knowing that tomorrow would bring a moment that would test everything he believed about kindness, about dignity, about the unexpected ways life could change when you least expected it. All he knew was that his tools were clean, his conscience was clear, and his small corner of the world was a little better because of the work he did. The weathered toolbox closed with a familiar click. Another day completed. Another small contribution to the ongoing story of his neighborhood, his family, his quiet but meaningful existence. In the growing dusk, Maple Street settled into evening rhythms, unaware that change was coming to one of its most steadfast residents. The rain started just after lunch, turning Maple Street into a river of reflections. Nico watched from under the garage bay as water cascaded from gutters and pooled in the street's familiar potholes. October weather in their neighborhood could be unpredictable, but he'd learned to appreciate these quiet moments when the world slowed down and fewer customers ventured out. He was organizing invoice receipts when the black SUV appeared through the rain-blurred windshield of the bay door. Even at a distance, the vehicle looked expensive, sleek lines, pristine paint, the kind of car that belonged in upscale dealerships rather than small neighborhood repair shops. It moved slowly down the street, windshield wipers working steadily against the downpour. The SUV pulled into his lot and sat idling for a moment. Through the rain-streaked windows, Nico could make out two figures, a woman in the driver's seat and what appeared to be a child beside her. The engine's smooth purr suggested quality engineering, the kind that rarely needed the services of a modest shop like his. When the driver's door opened, an elegant woman emerged. Even in the rain, she carried herself with unmistakable poise. Her coat was cream-colored and clearly expensive, her dark hair pulled back in a style that spoke of professional styling. She moved carefully through the puddles, her heels clicking against the wet asphalt as she approached the open bay. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cultured and polite. "I'm sorry to bother you, but my car seems to be having trouble. The engine light came on about 5 minutes ago." Nico wiped his hands on a shop rag and walked toward her. Up close, he could see the worry in her dark eyes, the way she glanced back toward the passenger side of the SUV where her child waited. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps in her early 30s, with the kind of composed beauty that suggested she was accustomed to having problems solved quickly and efficiently. "I can take a look," Nico said. "What kind of symptoms are you experiencing?" "It started with a slight hesitation when I accelerated," she explained. "Then the warning light appeared. I was hoping to make it to the dealer, but—" She gestured toward the rain. "This seemed like a safer option." "Smart choice. Weather like this, you don't want to risk breaking down on the highway." Nico glanced toward the SUV. "Would you like to bring your son inside where it's dry while I take a look?" Something shifted in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. "That's very kind of you. Tommy would actually love that. He's fascinated by cars. But most people don't." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Most people don't include him in conversations about mechanical things." Nico looked more closely at the passenger side of the vehicle and understood. Through the rain-spotted glass, he could see a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, sitting in what appeared to be a specialized car seat. When the woman opened the passenger door, Nico saw that Tommy was in a wheelchair, a sleek, modern chair that spoke of both necessity and quality care. "Hi there," Nico said, approaching the boy with the same easy manner he used with all children. "I'm Nico. Your mom says you like cars." Tommy's face lit up with genuine excitement. "I love cars, especially the engines. Mom says this one has 8 cylinders. Is that a lot?" 8 cylinders is definitely a lot, Nico confirmed, already impressed by the boy's knowledge. "Most cars have 4 or 6. 8 means this one has some serious power under the hood." As the woman maneuvered Tommy's chair out of the vehicle process she handled with practiced efficiency, Nico noticed the modifications inside the SUV. Hand controls, specialized seating, storage compartments, designed for medical equipment. Every detail spoke of a family that had adapted to mobility challenges with both resources and determination. "Would you like to see what's under the hood while I run the diagnostic?" Nico asked Tommy. "Really?" The boy's eyes widened. "Mom, can I?" The woman hesitated for just a moment, but something in Nico's manner must have reassured her. "If you're sure it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." Nico popped the hood and positioned Tommy's chair so he could see the engine compartment clearly. "This is a Vate engine, just like you thought. See how these parts are arranged." For the next 20 minutes, as rain drummed against the garage roof, Nico guided Tommy through the basics of automotive engineering. He pointed out the air filter, explained how pistons worked, showed him the difference between the radiator and the oil reservoir. Tommy absorbed every word, asking intelligent questions that revealed a sharp, curious mind. The woman watched silently from a few feet away, but Nico could feel her attention like a physical presence. She wasn't just monitoring her son's safety, she was studying how Nico interacted with Tommy, noting the way he spoke directly to the boy rather than around him, the way he included him in every explanation. "The diagnostic says it's a faulty oxygen sensor," Nico announced after hooking up his code reader. "Nothing serious, but it'll affect your fuel efficiency if we don't replace it." "How long will that take?" she asked. "About 45 minutes. I have the part in stock." Nico glanced at Tommy, who was still staring at the engine with fascination. "Tommy, would you like to help me with the repair? I could use an assistant." "Can I really help?" Tommy's voice cracked with excitement. "Absolutely, there are some tools I'll need, and you've got a good eye for detail." Nico looked to the woman for permission. "If that's okay with your mom." She nodded, but Nico caught something in her expression, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, more complex, as if she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find. The repair proceeded with Tommy as eager apprentice. Nico handed him tools, explained each step of the process, and treated the boy's questions with the same respect he'd show any curious adult. Tommy held the flashlight while Nico worked, his small hands steady and sure, despite his physical limitations. "Why does the sensor get dirty?" Tommy asked as Nico installed the new part. "Same reason anything gets dirty when it works hard," Nico explained. "Carbon builds up over time. It's like when you run really fast and get sweaty, engine works hard and leaves residue behind." Tommy laughed at the comparison, and Nico felt a familiar warmth spread through his chest. There was something special about connecting with a child's curiosity, about seeing the world through eyes that still found wonder in everyday mechanisms. The woman had pulled out her phone at some point, but she wasn't talking or texting. She was simply watching, her expression unreadable but intent. Nico wondered what she was thinking, whether she was impatient with the time this was taking, whether she was reconsidering her decision to let a stranger engage so freely with her son. "All finished," Nico announced, lowering the hood. "Tommy, would you like to start her up and see how she sounds?" "I can do that." Tommy's excitement was infectious. "With your mum's permission." Nico looked to the woman, who nodded with what might have been the beginning of a smile. Tommy pressed the ignition button, and the engine purred to life, smooth and quiet. The check engine light remained dark, mission accomplished. "Perfect," Nico said. "You're a natural mechanic, Tommy." As they prepared to leave, the woman approached Nico with her wallet. "What do I owe you?" "45 for the part, 20 for labor." Nico's standard rate, fair and honest. She handed him a $100 bill. "Keep the change. Thank you for—" She paused, glancing at Tommy, who was still beaming with pride. "Thank you for treating him like he belongs here." "He does belong here," Nico said simply. "Curious minds always belong where learning happens." As they drove away, Tommy waving enthusiastically from the passenger window, Nico stood in the garage doorway watching the rain. Something had happened in that hour that went beyond a simple repair. The woman's final words echoed in his mind. "Thank you for treating him like he belongs here." It struck him as strange that she would need to thank someone for basic human decency. But then, he'd seen enough of the world to know that kindness wasn't always as common as it should be. Perhaps Tommy had encountered people who saw his wheelchair before they saw his bright mind and eager spirit. The rain was letting up, patches of blue appearing between the clouds. Soon, other customers would arrive, and the day would return to its normal rhythm. But something had shifted in that ordinary afternoon, though Nico couldn't have said exactly what. He closed the garage bay and returned to his paperwork, unaware that the woman in the cream-colored coat was sitting in her SUV 3 blocks away, making notes on her phone about what she had just witnessed. Unaware that his simple act of inclusion had been observed and measured and found to contain something rare in her experience. Tommy chatted excitedly about engines and pistons and the kind mechanic who had let him help, while his mother listened with growing conviction that she had found something or someone worth investigating further. The rain stopped completely as evening approached, leaving Maple Street clean and glistening under the streetlights. In the small apartment above the garage, Nico told his mother about his day, mentioning the nice woman and her enthusiastic son, the routine repair that had somehow felt significant. Neither of them could have imagined that this chance encounter would reshape their quiet life in ways they never could have anticipated. 3 days passed before Nico saw the black SUV again. He'd found himself thinking about Tommy more than seemed reasonable, the boy's infectious enthusiasm, his sharp questions, the way his face had lit up when Nico treated him as a capable assistant rather than a fragile patient. There was something about that interaction that had settled into Nico's mind and refused to leave. The SUV appeared on Thursday morning, gliding into the parking lot with the same quiet elegance as before. This time, there was no rain, no emergency repair. The woman stepped out wearing dark jeans and a simple white blouse, looking less formal but no less poised. When she opened the passenger door, Tommy practically bounced in his wheelchair with excitement. "Nico!" the boy called out as his mother maneuvered the chair onto the asphalt. "We came back!" "I can see that," Nico said, walking over with a smile. "Everything running smoothly with the SUV?" "Perfectly," the woman replied. "I'm Isabel, by the way. I realized I never properly introduced myself. Nico Alvarez. Nice to meet you officially." He shook her offered hand, noting the firm grip, the direct eye contact. "What brings you back?" "Well," Isabel said, glancing at Tommy, "someone has been asking daily if we could visit the mechanic who let him help. I was hoping you might have a few minutes to show him around properly." Nico felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I've got all the time in the world for a fellow mechanic." Tommy beamed at being called a fellow mechanic. As they entered the garage, Nico noticed how Isabel took in every detail: the organized tool stations, the clean work areas, the family photos beside his father's old desk. Her gaze was assessing but not judgmental, as if she was cataloging information for some purpose he couldn't fathom. "This was my father's shop," Nico explained, leading them toward the main work bay. "He started it in 1987, taught me everything I know about cars, and quite a bit about life." "Is he retired?" Isabel asked. "Passed away 15 years ago, heart attack right here in the shop." Nico touched the workbench where his father had collapsed. "He was working on Mrs. Patterson's Oldsmobile. Finished the job, even though he was having chest pains. That was my dad, never left work undone." Tommy had wheeled himself to the lift controls, studying them with intense concentration. "How does this work, Nico?" For the next hour, Nico guided Tommy through the garage's equipment and procedures. He explained hydraulic systems, demonstrated tire balancing, showed how computer diagnostics translated engine problems into readable codes. Tommy absorbed everything, asking questions that revealed genuine understanding rather than simple curiosity. Isabel observed from various positions around the garage, occasionally asking questions of her own. Her inquiries were thoughtful, focused on Nico's methods and philosophy rather than technical details. She wanted to know how he determined what repairs were necessary versus what was optional. She asked about his relationship with long-term customers, his approach to pricing, his thoughts on honesty in business. "I charge what's fair," Nico explained while Tommy examined a transmission diagram. "Not what the market will bear, not what I can get away with, what's fair for the work performed. My father taught me that reputation is the only asset that can't be stolen or copied." "That's an unusual approach in today's economy," Isabel observed. "Maybe, but it works. I've got customers who've been coming here for 20 years. Their kids bring their cars here. That's worth more than squeezing extra profit out of individual transactions." Something in Isabel's expression shifted approval, perhaps, or recognition. She made a note on her phone, then put it away and focused entirely on watching Tommy attempt to identify different wrench sizes. "He's very bright," Nico said quietly. "Exceptionally bright," Isabel agreed, "but not everyone sees past the wheelchair to discover that." Nico studied her face, noting the careful neutrality that didn't quite hide deeper emotion. "Their loss." "Yes," she said simply, "their loss." As the visit wound down, Isabel approached Nico with a proposition that caught him off guard. "I'm working on a project, researching local automotive services. Would you be interested in a consulting arrangement? I'd pay well above your normal rates for detailed insights into your business model." Nico frowned. "What kind of project?" "I'm evaluating service providers across different economic sectors. Your reputation for honesty and quality workmanship makes you an interesting case study." She handed him a simple white business card with just her name and phone number. "I'd compensate you for your time, of course, quite generously." The card felt expensive between his fingers' heavy paper, elegant typography, No company logo, no title, just contact information. Nico studied it, then looked at Isabel with growing puzzlement. I'm not sure I understand what you're looking for. Insights, perspective, a successful small business owner's approach to customer service and community engagement. Her tone was professional, but not cold. I assure you, it's entirely legitimate, references available upon request. Tommy had wheeled himself over during their conversation. Are we going to come back again, Mama? That depends on whether Nico would like us to come back. Nico looked at the boy's eager face, then at Isabel's carefully composed expression. Something about this felt unusual, but he couldn't identify anything specifically wrong. And Tommy's enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. Of course you can come back, both of you. Tommy's welcome here anytime. And the consulting work? Isabel pressed gently. I'll think about it. Nico pocketed the business card. What exactly would you want to know? Everything. How you built customer loyalty, how you maintain quality standards, how you balance profit with community service, how you train employees. She paused. How you relate to customers who might be overlooked or undervalued elsewhere. The last comment carried weight that made Nico glance at Tommy, who was examining a carburetor with intense concentration. Understanding dawned. This is about Tommy. Partly, Isabel admitted. He talks about you constantly, about how you treated him like he belonged here, like his questions mattered. That's not something he experiences everywhere we go. Then maybe we need to visit more places together, Nico said. Show people what they're missing. Isabel's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing something vulnerable underneath. I've been trying to do that for 8 years. It's harder than you might think. As they prepared to leave, Tommy extracted a promise that they would return soon. Isabel settled their account, again paying more than necessary, despite Nico's protests about the minimal work performed. Consider it a retainer, she said, for future consulting services. I haven't agreed to anything yet. No, she acknowledged, but you will. Her confidence puzzled him, but there was nothing arrogant about it. She seemed to know something he didn't, to see angles he was missing. As they drove away, Tommy waving enthusiastically from the passenger window, Nico found himself holding the business card and wondering what he'd gotten himself into. That evening, he mentioned the encounter to his mother over dinner. Elena listened with the sharp attention she reserved for truly important matters. Rich lady wants to pay you for talking about the shop, she summarized. Something like that. Says she's doing research. Elena considered this while sipping her coffee. And the boy? Smart kid, loves cars, happens to use a wheelchair. And she's watching how you treat him. Nico looked up from his plate, recognizing his mother's tone. What are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe this isn't about research, Maijo. Maybe this is about something more personal. Elena smiled with the wisdom that came from 70. 2 years of observing human nature. Maybe this mama is looking for something specific, and she thinks she might have found it. That night, Nico lay awake thinking about Isabel's careful questions, Tommy's infectious enthusiasm, and the business card on his nightstand. Whatever was happening, it felt larger than consulting work or casual visits. It felt like the beginning of something that could change everything, though he had no idea what that might mean. Outside his window, Maple Street settled into familiar evening rhythms, unaware that change was already in motion, carried forward by a boy's excitement and his mother's careful plans. The small notebook appeared during Tommy's 3rd visit, a spiral-bound journal with a cartoon car on the cover. Tommy clutched it protectively as his mother wheeled him into the garage, his excitement barely contained. I've been drawing everything you taught me, he announced, opening the notebook to reveal detailed sketches of engine components. Look, this is the carburetor, and this is how the pistons move up and down. Nico examined the drawings with genuine admiration. Despite their childish style, they demonstrated real understanding of mechanical principles. Tommy had labeled each part, added arrows to show movement, even included notes about function and purpose. These are excellent, Nico said. You've got a real gift for technical illustration. Mama says I might be an engineer someday, Tommy said proudly. Your mama's right. Engineers start exactly like this by understanding how things work and drawing what they see. Isabel watched their interaction with that same careful attention Nico had noticed before. She'd been coming regularly for 2 weeks now, always with plausible reasons, questions about maintenance schedules, requests for Tommy to see different types of repairs, interest in Nico's diagnostic methods. Each visit felt natural, unforced, but Nico was beginning to sense deeper currents beneath the surface. "I brought lunch," Isabel announced, producing an insulated bag from the SUV. "I was hoping you might join us for a break." They sat at the small table in Nico's office area, sharing sandwiches and cold drinks, while Tommy continued sketching. The boy had moved on to drawing imaginary car designs, vehicles that combined elements from different manufacturers with modifications of his own invention. "He's been doing this since he was 4, Isabel explained, watching Tommy work. "Always designing, always improving on existing models." "What got him interested in cars?" Nico asked. "Necessity, initially. We spent a lot of time in medical facilities when he was younger, and the parking lots were full of interesting vehicles. Tommy started studying them, asking questions about why some were built differently than others." Isabel's voice carried memories of difficult times, navigated with grace. It became a way for him to focus on something positive during challenging periods. Nico watched Tommy add racing stripes to a hybrid sports car of his own design. "He's lucky to have a mother who encourages his interests." "We're both lucky," Isabel said quietly. "Not everyone understands that having physical limitations doesn't mean having intellectual limitations." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Elena, Nico's mother, making her careful way down the stairs from their apartment. Nico immediately rose to help her, but she waved him off with characteristic independence. "I wanted to meet our visitors," Elena announced in accented English, her smile warm and welcoming. "Nico talks about you both every evening." Tommy looked up from his notebook with bright curiosity. "You live upstairs? That's so cool. Do you get to watch Nico work on cars all day?" "Sometimes," Elena laughed, "when these old eyes can see that far. Mostly I listen to him singing while he works. He thinks no one can hear him." "Mama," Nico protested, embarrassed. "What kind of songs?" Tommy asked, delighted by this revelation. "Old songs. Songs his father used to sing in this same garage." Elena settled into a chair beside Tommy, studying his drawings. "These are very good. You have artist's hands." For the next hour, 3 generations sat together sharing stories and comparing sketches. Elena told Tommy about the neighborhood's history, about families who'd brought their cars to the shop for decades. Tommy showed her his latest designs and asked questions about life in Mexico, where Elena had been born. Isabel participated quietly, but Nico noticed how she absorbed every detail of the interaction. She seemed particularly interested in Elena's stories about community connections, about customers who'd become extended family, about the way the shop served as an unofficial gathering place for neighbors seeking advice or simply companionship. "Mrs. Patterson still brings cookies every Christmas," Elena was explaining. 23 years now, the same recipe. And the Rodriguez family invites us to every birthday party, every graduation. We are not just the mechanics, we are part of their lives." "That's beautiful," Isabel said, and Nico heard genuine emotion in her voice. As Elena returned upstairs for her afternoon rest, Tommy announced his intention to design a special car for her, something with extra comfortable seats and controls that would be easy for elderly hands to operate. "That's very thoughtful," Nico said. "What gave you that idea?" "I notice things about people," Tommy said matter-of-factly, "like how you always make sure the tools are in exactly the right place so you don't waste time looking for them. And how you explain things differently to different customers, simpler for some people, more detailed for others." Nico glanced at Isabel, surprised by her son's perceptiveness. She was watching Tommy with a mixture of pride and something else, recognition, perhaps, of shared observational skills. "You're very good at noticing things," Nico agreed. "Mama says it's important to pay attention to how people treat each other. She says you can learn a lot about someone by watching how they act when they think no one's looking." The comment landed with unusual weight. Isabel's carefully neutral expression didn't change, but Nico sensed significance in Tommy's innocent observation. He wondered, not for the first time, what exactly Isabel was looking for in these visits. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Pete Martinez, needing a quick oil change before a weekend fishing trip. Nico introduced Tommy as his consulting engineer, which sent the boy into paroxysms of delight. "Can I help with the oil change?" Tommy asked eagerly. "If Pete doesn't mind having an expert supervisor," Nico replied. Pete, a grandfather himself, was charmed by Tommy's enthusiasm and technical knowledge. Soon they had the old Ford on the lift, with Tommy directing operations from his wheelchair, while Pete and Nico handled the physical work. "This kid knows his stuff," Pete commented as Tommy explained the importance of checking the oil filter for debris. "He's been studying," Nico said proudly. "Where'd you learn so much about cars, son?" Pete asked Tommy directly. "Nico's been teaching me, and I read books and watch videos. I'm going to be an automotive engineer someday." "No doubt about it," Pete agreed. "With knowledge like that and enthusiasm like this, you'll design the best cars anyone's ever seen." Isabel had positioned herself where she could observe the entire interaction. Nico was becoming accustomed to her quiet watchfulness, but today something felt different, more intense, more purposeful, as if she was making some kind of final assessment. After Pete left, full of praise for Tommy's assistance and Nico's teaching methods, Isabel approached with an unusual request. "Would you be willing to accept payment for Tommy's visits? I know you're not running a formal educational program, but you're providing him with something valuable." "I'm not taking money for spending time with Tommy," Nico said firmly. "That's not how friendship works." "Friendship," Isabel repeated, as if testing the word. "Is that what this is? What else would it be?" She studied his face for a long moment. "You're a very unusual man, Nico Alvarez." "I'm really not. I'm about as ordinary as they come." "No," she said quietly. "You're not ordinary at all." As they prepared to leave, Tommy extracted his usual promise about returning soon, but this time Isabel added her own request. "Would you be available for dinner this weekend? Tommy would love to cook for you well. Help me cook. He's been practicing some recipes." The invitation surprised Nico. Their relationship had been entirely centered around the garage, the shop, his professional space. Extending it into social territory felt significant, though he couldn't say why. "I'd be honored," he said. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," Isabel replied, "and maybe some stories about your father. Tommy loves hearing about the shop's history." That evening, as Nico told his mother about the dinner invitation, Elena nodded with satisfaction. "Good," she said simply. "Good? This lady, she's been watching you for weeks, studying how you treat her boy, how you run the shop, how you live your life." Elena sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Now she wants to know you better. That means you passed some kind of test." "What kind of test?" "The kind that matters most, my Joe. The kind that measures your heart." Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening routines. Children played in yards, families gathered for dinner, the rhythm of ordinary life continued, unchanged. But for Nico, something fundamental was shifting. The dinner invitation felt like a doorway opening, though he had no idea what lay on the other side. In his notebook, Tommy was adding final details to his design for Elena's perfect car, unaware that his mother was making plans that would soon transform all their lives in ways none of them could yet imagine. The photograph sat on Nico's desk exactly where his father had placed it 37 years ago. In the faded color image, a younger Miguel Alvarez stood beside his 8-year-old son in front of the newly painted shop sign. Both wore matching blue coveralls. Both grinned at the camera with identical expressions of pride and anticipation. Miguel's hand rested on Nico's shoulder in a gesture that conveyed both protection and partnership. Nico picked up the frame as he prepared for another of Isabel's increasingly frequent visits. 3 weeks had passed since that first rainy afternoon, and their relationship had evolved into something he couldn't quite categorize. Officially, Isabel was conducting research for her unnamed project, asking detailed questions about his business methods, customer relationships, and operational philosophy. Unofficially, she seemed to be studying him with the intensity of someone seeking answers to questions she never quite voiced. "She's here again," Elena called from upstairs, her tone carrying amused approval. Through the office window, Nico watched the black SUV navigate carefully into the parking area. Isabel emerged first, moving with her characteristic poise, then began the practiced routine of helping Tommy from the passenger seat. The boy's excitement was visible, even at a distance. He practically bounced in his wheelchair as his mother maneuvered him toward the garage entrance. "Nico," Tommy called out, waving a thick folder, "I brought my whole portfolio to show you." Over the past weeks, Tommy's visits had become the highlight of Nico's days. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, his questions increasingly sophisticated, his understanding of mechanical principles growing with each explanation. More importantly, his confidence had blossomed under Nico's patient guidance and genuine respect. "Let's see what you've been working on," Nico said, accepting the folder with appropriate ceremony. Inside were dozens of drawings, diagrams, and technical sketches. Tommy had been busy designing everything from eco-friendly delivery vehicles to adaptive equipment for drivers with physical limitations. Each drawing showed progression from their previous sessions, incorporating concepts Nico had explained and building on them with creative solutions. "This one's my favorite," Tommy said, pointing to a detailed sketch of a mobile repair unit. "It's like bringing the garage to people who can't bring their cars to the garage. See? It has all the tools and diagnostic equipment, but it's designed to fit in tight spaces." Nico studied the drawing with growing amazement. The design showed genuine understanding of space optimization, equipment requirements, and practical limitations. More than that, it demonstrated empathy. Tommy was thinking about customers who might have difficulty accessing traditional repair services. "This is brilliant," Nico said honestly. "Have you shown this to your mother?" "She says I should patent it," Tommy replied proudly. Isabel had been listening while organizing papers on the desk beside Miguel's photograph. When she picked up the frame to examine it more closely, Nico noticed her expression soften. "You look exactly like him," she observed. "Everyone says that. Same stubborn streak, according to my mother. Tell me about him." She settled into a chair, giving him her full attention. "How did he build all this?" Nico found himself sharing stories he rarely told about Miguel's arrival from Mexico, with nothing but determination and mechanical knowledge learned from his own father. About the early years when the shop barely survived month to month, about the gradual building of trust and reputation that had sustained the business through economic downturns and neighborhood changes. He used to say that every customer who left satisfied was an investment in the future, Nico explained while Tommy sketched nearby. Not just the future of the business, but the future of the community. He believed that taking care of people's transportation needs was taking care of their ability to work, to provide for their families, to participate in the life of the neighborhood. "That's a profound philosophy for a small business owner," Isabel commented. "My father was a profound man. He understood that reputation is built one interaction at a time, and that cutting corners or taking advantage of people's trust would eventually destroy everything he'd worked to build. And you've maintained that philosophy." "I've tried to. Sometimes it's not easy. There are bills to pay, equipment to replace, emergencies that strain the budget. But my father's voice is always there, reminding me that integrity is the only asset that can't be stolen or copied." Isabel made notes on her phone, but her questions went deeper than business practices. She wanted to know about the personal cost of maintaining such standards, about times when competitors had prospered by charging more or providing less, about the challenges of running a family business in a changing economy. "Don't you ever want more?" she asked. "Expansion, multiple locations, corporate growth?" Nico considered the question while watching Tommy add details to a new design. "More what? More money, more stress, more time away from the work I actually enjoy. More impact," More reach, more ability to help people. I help people every day. Mrs. Patterson gets to work because I keep her car running. The Rodriguez family can afford groceries because I don't overcharge for repairs. Tommy learns about engineering because I have time to answer his questions. Nico shrugged. That seems like plenty of impact to me. But imagine if you could do that for thousands of people instead of dozens. Then I wouldn't know their names, wouldn't understand their individual needs, wouldn't be part of their community. I'd be running a business instead of serving neighbors. Something in Isabel's expression suggested his answer was both expected and disappointing. She made more notes, then moved on to questions about customer demographics, service pricing, and competitive positioning. Her inquiries grew increasingly specific, as if she was building a comprehensive profile of his operation. Tommy had finished his latest sketch and wheeled himself over to examine the garage's hydraulic lift controls. Nico, could you teach me how to operate this safely? The lift? That's pretty advanced equipment, Tommy. I know I can't do the physical parts yet, but I could learn the theory, right? How the hydraulics work, what safety checks you need to do, how to position cars properly. Nico glanced at Isabel, who nodded encouragingly. Theory is exactly where every good mechanic starts. Come on, let's walk through the process. For the next hour, Nico explained hydraulic principles, safety protocols, and proper procedures, while Tommy absorbed every detail. The boy's questions revealed an understanding that went far beyond his years, and his suggestions for safety improvements showed the kind of analytical thinking that impressed even experienced mechanics. You've got the mind of an engineer, Nico told him. But more than that, you've got the instincts of someone who cares about doing things right. Like you, Tommy said simply. The comment struck Nico unexpectedly. He looked at this bright, eager boy who saw past surface differences to fundamental character, who valued competence and integrity over flashy success, who found joy in understanding how things worked. In many ways, Tommy reminded him of his younger, self-curious, determined, hungry for knowledge and acceptance. Like my father taught me, Nico corrected gently. Then your father was a very smart man. As the afternoon progressed, Isabel's questions became more personal. She wanted to know about Nico's dreams, his regrets, his vision for the future. She asked about the scholarship he'd lost, the choices he'd made, the sacrifices that had shaped his current life. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd gone to college? She asked, while Tommy practiced identifying different types of wrenches. Of course, but wondering about alternative paths is different from regretting the one you actually took. Nico organized tools as he spoke, his hands automatically following patterns established by decades of practice. I got something from this life that I might not have found in a classroom: connection to community, purpose rooted in service, the satisfaction of solving real problems for real people. And the financial limitations, the constant struggle to make ends meet. Those are challenges, not failures. My father faced them, his father before him. Working people always face financial pressures. That's the nature of honest labor. But what if you didn't have to choose between financial security and meaningful work? The question hung in the air with unusual weight. Nico studied Isabel's face, sensing deeper currents beneath her academic interest. What exactly are you researching? Success models, she said carefully. How people define achievement, how they balance competing priorities, how they maintain integrity under pressure. And what kind of conclusions are you reaching? That success is more complex than most people assume. That the metrics traditionally used to measure achievement often miss the most important elements. Tommy had finished his wrench identification exercise and wheeled himself back to where the adults were talking. Are you studying Nico for school, Mama? Something like that, Isabel replied, but her expression suggested the truth was more complicated. As they prepared to leave, Isabel made an unexpected request. Would you be willing to meet some colleagues of mine? People who are interested in your approach to customer service and community engagement. What kind of colleagues? Business consultants, researchers, people who study successful small enterprises. She handed him another of her simple white business cards. There might be opportunities for you to share your insights with a broader audience. Nico pocketed the card without committing to anything. Something about the offer felt premature, as if important information was being withheld. I'll think about it. Of course, no pressure. But as they drove away, Tommy waving enthusiastically from the passenger window, Nico sensed that pressure was exactly what was building. Isabel's questions had grown more pointed, her interest more intense, her suggestions more directive. Whatever research she was conducting, it seemed to be approaching some kind of conclusion. That evening, he showed the photograph to his mother, pointing out details he'd shared with Isabel's pride in his father's stance, the promise in his own young face, the sense of partnership that had defined their relationship. "She's studying this picture like she's studying you," Elena observed, "looking for clues about what makes you who you are. What do you think she's really after?" "I think," Elena said carefully, "that this lady has resources most people only dream about, and I think she's trying to decide whether you're the kind of man who could handle that responsibility." "What kind of responsibility?" "The kind that comes with power, Mijo. The kind that tests whether success changes who you are inside." Outside his window, Maple Street settled into familiar evening patterns. But Nico lay awake long into the night, thinking about alternative paths, unexpected opportunities, and the growing certainty that his quiet life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The stack of medical bills grew thicker each week, a monument to Elena's declining health and the inadequacy of Medicare coverage. Nico kept them in a manila folder in his desk drawer, away from his mother's sight, but their weight pressed on him during every quiet moment. Physical therapy sessions, specialist consultations, prescription medications, each necessary expense chipped away at the shop's already thin margins. Thursday morning brought another envelope with the familiar logo of Mercy General Hospital. Nico opened it while his coffee grew cold, scanning the itemized charges for Elena's latest round of tests. The doctors were concerned about irregular heartbeats, wanted additional monitoring, recommended procedures that would cost thousands of dollars they didn't have. He was still staring at the bill when Isabel's SUV pulled into the lot. Through the window, he watched her help Tommy from the passenger seat, noting the boy's obvious excitement about another visit. Tommy had become a fixture in the garage, his enthusiasm brightening even Nico's most challenging days. The irony wasn't lost on him. A wealthy woman's son was providing him with joy he couldn't afford to give his own mother. "You look tired," Isabel observed as she entered the garage. Her perceptiveness had grown sharper over their weeks of interaction, as if she was learning to read the subtle signs of his moods. "Long night," Nico replied, closing the folder quickly. Tommy had already wheeled himself to the parts inventory, eager to continue their ongoing education about automotive components. "Nico, I've been thinking about the mobile repair unit design. What if we added solar panels to power the diagnostic equipment?" Despite his worries, Nico smiled. Tommy's creativity was boundless, his solutions increasingly sophisticated. "Solar panels are expensive, but they'd make the unit completely self-sufficient." Good thinking. As Tommy sketched modifications to his design, Isabel positioned herself where she could observe both her son's work and Nico's demeanor. Her questions today focused on operational challenges, financial pressures, the difficulties of maintaining quality service while managing economic constraints. "How do you handle cash flow variations?" she asked, while pretending to examine a service manual. "Carefully," Nico replied. "Some months are better than others. Summers usually good people take road trips, push their cars harder. Winter can be tough when everyone's saving money for holidays. And when unexpected expenses arise." The question felt pointed, as if she somehow knew about the medical bills. Nico glanced at her, wondering what she might have observed or intuited. "You adapt, defer non-essential purchases, work longer hours, hope things balance out eventually." That sounds stressful. It's reality for most small business owners. We don't have corporate reserves or investor backing. We live month to month and try to build something sustainable despite the uncertainty. Isabel made notes on her phone, but her attention seemed divided. She kept watching Tommy, who was completely absorbed in redesigning his mobile repair concept with solar power integration. The boy's focus was absolute, his technical understanding impressive for someone his age. "He talks about you constantly," she said quietly. "At home, in the car, during therapy sessions, you've become his hero. He's a remarkable kid. Any attention I give him is the least he deserves." Not everyone sees it that way. Most people see the wheelchair first, make assumptions about his limitations, treat him like he's fragile or incapable. Then most people are missing out on knowing an extraordinary young man. Something in Isabel's expression shifted gratitude, mixed with something deeper, more complex. You have no idea how rare that attitude is. Before Nico could respond, Pete Martinez arrived with his pickup truck, making ominous grinding noises. The timing was unfortunate. Pete was a regular customer, but his repairs typically involved extensive labor for modest compensation. Today, Nico couldn't afford to turn away any paying work, regardless of the profit margin. "Sounds like your transmission's having trouble," Nico diagnosed after a brief test drive. "How bad is it, Doc?" Pete asked, using the nickname he'd assigned Nico years ago. "Bad enough. Probably need to rebuild or replace the whole unit." Pete's face fell. "What's that going to run me?" Nico calculated quickly parts, labor, the time he'd lose, working on more profitable jobs. $1,500 for a rebuild, $2,500 for replacement with a warranty. "Jesus, I don't have that kind of money right now. We can work something out. Payment plan, maybe some trade work if you've got skills the shop can use." This was exactly the kind of financial pressure Isabel had been asking about. Pete was a good man, a loyal customer, someone who'd supported the shop for years. But carrying his debt, while facing his own mounting bills, would strain Nico's resources beyond breaking point. Tommy had been listening to the conversation with interest. "Could we modify the transmission instead of replacing it, like upgrade specific components while keeping the functional parts?" Pete and Nico both stared at the 8-year-old who'd just suggested a solution neither adult had considered. "That's actually not a bad idea," Nico said slowly. "Selective reconstruction instead of complete overhaul." "Would that work?" Pete asked hopefully. "It might. Let me examine the unit more carefully, see which components are actually failing versus which ones are just showing wear." As Nico dove into the diagnostic process, Tommy positioned himself where he could observe every step. The boy's questions revealed growing understanding of transmission mechanics, and his suggestions showed intuitive grasp of problem-solving approaches. Isabel watched the interaction with obvious pride, but also with that calculating attention Nico had learned to recognize. She was measuring something, evaluating criteria he couldn't identify. "You're teaching him more than automotive repair," she observed. "How do you mean?" "Critical thinking, creative problem solving, the confidence to offer solutions, even when you're the youngest person in the room. Those are life skills, not just mechanical ones." "Exactly. That's what makes your teaching so valuable." The transmission analysis revealed that Tommy's instinct had been correct. Selective repair would solve Pete's immediate problem at a fraction of the cost. More importantly, it demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking that could revolutionize approach to automotive service. "Kid's a genius," Pete declared when Nico explained the solution. "You ought to be teaching this stuff professionally." "Maybe someday," Nico replied, not noticing Isabel's sharp attention to his comment. As Pete left, grateful and relieved, Isabel made another of her increasingly frequent personal observations. "You could have charged him full price for the complete rebuild. He would have found a way to pay, and bankrupted himself in the process. Pete's got 3 grandchildren and a fixed income. Taking advantage of his loyalty would be unconscionable. Even when you're facing your own financial pressures." Nico paused in his cleanup, struck by her phrasing. "What makes you think I'm facing financial pressures?" "Observation. The way you calculate costs before quoting prices. The way you defer maintenance on your own equipment to prioritize customer needs. The way you worry about things you think no one notices. Her perceptiveness was unsettling. Those are normal business concerns. Are they? Or are they signs of someone who's stretched too thin, sacrificing too much personal security for other people's welfare? The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from upstairs, Elena's voice calling out in distress, the sound of something falling. Nico dropped his tools and ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. He found his mother on the kitchen floor, conscious but disoriented, her hand pressed to her chest. "The pain came so suddenly," she gasped, "like someone squeezing my heart." "Don't move, Mama. I'm calling an ambulance." As paramedics arrived and prepared Elena for transport, Nico felt the familiar weight of impossible choices. The hospital would run tests, recommend procedures, generate bills that would push him deeper into debt. But Elena was his mother, his responsibility, his heart walking around outside his body. Isabel and Tommy had waited respectfully in the garage during the medical emergency, but they approached as the ambulance prepared to leave. "Is there anything we can do?" Isabel asked quietly. "Pray," Nico replied, climbing into the ambulance beside his mother's stretcher. As the ambulance pulled away, Isabel stood with her son in the empty garage, surrounded by the tools and memories of 3 generations of Alvarez men. In her purse, she carried research notes that painted a comprehensive picture of a man whose integrity was both his greatest strength and his most limiting weakness. The time for observation was ending. Soon, she would have to make decisions that would change all their lives forever. Elena spent 3 days in the hospital before the doctors declared her condition stable. Her heart would require ongoing monitoring and medication, but she could return home with careful management. The relief Nico felt was tempered by the stack of insurance forms and billing statements that would follow another mountain of debt to navigate while keeping the shop running. Tommy visited on Friday afternoon, wheeling himself into the garage with unusual solemnity. His mother followed, carrying flowers and a casserole dish that smelled of home cooking and comfort. "How is Elena?" Tommy asked immediately. "Better. Coming home tomorrow, if everything goes well with her final tests." Nico accepted the casserole gratefully. "She'll be excited to see you. She's been asking about your latest drawings." "I made something special for her," Tommy announced, producing a carefully rendered sketch of the neighborhood from Elena's upstairs window. He'd included every detail: the oak trees lining Maple Street, Pete's house with its distinctive blue shutters, the corner store where Elena bought her weekly groceries. At the center, he'd drawn the garage with both Nico and Elena visible through the windows, surrounded by the community that cared about them. "This is beautiful, Tommy. She's going to love it. I wanted to show how many people care about her, and about you." The simple statement carried emotional weight that struck Nico unexpectedly. In the chaos of medical emergencies and financial worries, he'd forgotten to appreciate the network of support that surrounded them. Neighbors had been calling constantly, offering help, meals, prayers, whatever assistance they could provide. Isabel had been quiet during their exchange, but now she stepped forward with an envelope in her hand. "This came to your business address. The delivery service couldn't find anyone to sign for it." Nico opened the envelope, expecting another bill or routine correspondence. Instead, he found a formal letter from Mercy General Hospital's billing department, informing him that an anonymous benefactor had paid Elena's entire medical account in full. All charges: hospital stays, physician fees, diagnostic tests, prescribed medications, had been settled with no obligation remaining. "I don't understand," Nico said, reading the letter twice to ensure he hadn't misinterpreted its contents. "Someone paid my grandmother's bills?" Tommy asked, reading over Nico's shoulder. Apparently. Nico looked at Isabel, searching her expression for clues. Do you know anything about this?" "Why would I know anything about anonymous charitable donations?" she replied, but something in her tone suggested carefully chosen words rather than genuine surprise. "Because you're the only person I know who might have access to this kind of money." "That's quite an assumption." "Is it?" 3 months of weekly visits, detailed questions about my finances, obvious interest in my family situation. It doesn't take a detective to see patterns. Tommy was studying his mother's face with the keen observation skills that had impressed Nico from their first meeting. "Mama, you did pay the bills, didn't you?" "Tommy, you pay lots of people's bills. Remember Mrs. Chen's surgery and the scholarship for Maria's daughter? You help people all the time." The innocent revelation hit Nico like a physical blow. Tommy's casual mention of other charitable interventions painted a picture of systematic generosity that went far beyond casual kindness. This wasn't a random act of charity, it was part of a pattern, a lifestyle, a level of wealth that could casually eliminate debts that represented months of Nico's income. "Who are you?" Nico asked quietly. Isabel's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. She looked at her son, who was watching both adults with growing confusion, then back at Nico with something approaching resignation. "My name is Isabel Klein. I'm the CEO of Klein Industries." Nico stared at her, processing the implications. Klein Industries was one of the largest private corporations in the region. Manufacturing, technology, real estate development, charitable foundations. Their corporate headquarters occupied a downtown skyscraper visible from the garage's parking lot. If she was telling the truth, Isabel commanded resources that dwarfed the economy of entire small cities. "Why?" he asked. "Why would someone like you spend months in a neighborhood garage pretending to need automotive research?" "Because I needed to know if you were real." "Real?" "Genuinely kind, actually honest, truly committed to treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances." She sat down heavily in the chair beside his desk, suddenly looking exhausted. "Do you have any idea how rare those qualities are in my world?" Tommy was looking between his mother and Nico with dawning understanding. "You were testing him, weren't you, Mama? Like when you test me on my arithmetic, but for grown-up things." "Something like that, sweetheart." "But why test Nico? He's the nicest person we know." "Because nice people don't always stay nice when circumstances change. Because kindness is easy when it costs nothing, harder when it requires sacrifice." Isabel's voice carried years of disappointment, betrayals that had taught her to verify character before offering trust. "I needed to know if Nico's integrity was conditional or absolute." Nico felt betrayed, manipulated, reduced to a research subject in someone else's experiment. "And what exactly were you planning to do with your conclusions?" "Offer you a partnership." "What kind of partnership?" "The kind that could change thousands of lives. The kind that could take everything you've built here and scale it to reach people across the country." She gestured toward Tommy's drawings, his notebook full of innovative designs. "Look at what you've accomplished with one boy in 3 months. Imagine what you could do with the resources to help hundreds, thousands of children like Tommy." "Children like Tommy don't need charity. They need respect, opportunity, people who see their potential instead of their limitations." "Exactly, and you've proven you can provide that. You've demonstrated the teaching methods, the inclusive approach, the genuine care that could revolutionize how we think about disability and potential." Nico walked to the window, staring out at the familiar neighborhood that had shaped his entire adult life. Everything he'd built was here: relationships, reputation, community connections that had taken decades to establish. The idea of leaving, expanding, changing the fundamental nature of his work felt like betrayal of his father's legacy. "Why me? You could hire professional educators, disability specialists, people with formal training in inclusive teaching methods." "Because formal training doesn't teach you to see a child's potential before you see their limitations. Because professional credentials don't guarantee the patience to let an 8-year-old help with transmission repairs." Isabel's voice grew passionate, revealing depths of emotion beneath her composed exterior. "I've met hundreds of experts, Nico. You're the first person I've encountered who treats Tommy like he's capable rather than fragile." Tommy had been listening intently, his young mind processing adult complexities with characteristic insight. "Are you angry at Mama for pretending, Nico?" The direct question forced Nico to examine his emotions honestly. Anger, yes, but also hurt, confusion, a sense that their relationship had been built on false foundations. But underneath those immediate reactions was recognition of Isabel's motivation, mother's desperate search for someone who would see her son's worth. "I'm hurt that you couldn't trust me with the truth from the beginning," he said to Isabel. "Would you have behaved the same way if you'd known who I was?" The question struck at the heart of his confusion. Would he have been more careful, more deferential, less natural in his interactions with Tommy? Would the knowledge of Isabel's wealth and power have changed his approach to their relationship? "I don't know," he admitted. "That's why I couldn't tell you. I needed to see who you really are when no one important is watching." But people were watching. My neighbors, my customers, my mother, they're all important. To you, yes, but not to most people in my position. Most people with my resources never interact with individuals like your neighbors, never consider their opinions or respect their judgment. Tommy had grown quiet during their exchange, his expression thoughtful and increasingly troubled. Finally, he spoke up with the clarity that had consistently surprised the adults in his life. "I don't understand why everyone's upset. Mama needed to know if Nico was as nice as he seemed. Nico didn't know Mama was rich. But nothing about how you treat me has changed, has it, Nico?" The simple observation cut through layers of adult complexity to the essential truth. Regardless of deception or revelation, Tommy was still the same brilliant, enthusiastic boy he'd always been. Nico's feelings about him hadn't changed. The lessons they'd shared, the friendship they'd built, the mutual respect they'd developed, none of that had been false or conditional. "No," Nico said quietly. "Nothing about how I see you has changed. And Mama's still Mama, even if she has lots of money. She's still the person who drives me to therapy and helps with homework and worries about whether I'm happy." From the mouths of babes came wisdom that escaped adult understanding. Tommy had identified the core truth that both grown-ups were struggling to accept, that identity transcends circumstances, that character remains constant regardless of external revelations. "You're right," Isabel said, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "The people we are hasn't changed. Only what we know about each other has changed." But for Nico, the deception still stung. Trust, once broken, required time and proof to rebuild. The partnership offer hung between them, attractive and terrifying in equal measure, representing either the opportunity of a lifetime or the end of everything he'd worked to build. Outside the garage, Maple Street continued its familiar rhythms, unaware that one of its most stable residents was facing a choice that would reshape not only his future, but the lives of countless others he had yet to meet. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail with the impersonal efficiency of legal documents. Nico read it twice before the words penetrated his consciousness: 30 days to bring his mortgage current or face foreclosure proceedings. The amount due was staggering: 6 months of missed or partial payments, accumulated interest, legal fees that had compounded while he focused on Elena's medical crisis. He sat in the garage office, surrounded by 3 generations of Alvarez family history, holding a piece of paper that threatened to end it all. The irony was bitter. Elena's medical bills had been mysteriously paid in full, but the shop's mortgage had fallen so far behind that recovery seemed impossible. Even working 16-hour days, even sacrificing every personal expense, he couldn't generate enough cash flow to satisfy the bank's demands. Elena was upstairs resting, unaware of the latest crisis. The doctors had declared her condition stable, but stressed the importance of avoiding emotional stress. Telling her about the foreclosure would risk triggering another cardiac episode, but hiding it meant bearing the burden alone while pretending everything was normal. The neighborhood organized a response with characteristic loyalty and determination. Pete Martinez launched a fundraising campaign, going door to door with coffee cans labeled "Save Alvarez Auto." Mrs. Patterson organized a bake sale outside the grocery store. The Rodriguez family started a collection at their children's school, explaining that Mr. Alvarez was the man who kept their van running so they could get to work and earn money for rent and food. But goodwill couldn't match mathematics. After a week of tireless community effort, they'd raised less than $3,000, a meaningful gesture that represented genuine sacrifice from working families, but a drop in the ocean compared to what the bank demanded. Nico spent sleepless nights calculating impossible scenarios, looking for solutions that didn't exist. He could sell the equipment, but used automotive tools wouldn't bring enough to satisfy the debt. He could declare bankruptcy, but that would destroy his credit and prevent him from starting over elsewhere. He could approach other lenders, but his debt-to-income ratio made him unemployable to any rational creditor. On Thursday afternoon, as he prepared to close the shop and begin the painful process of dismantling 37 years of family legacy, a small figure appeared in the doorway. Tommy had somehow escaped his mother's supervision and made the 6-block journey from their upscale neighborhood to Maple Street, navigating curbs and sidewalk cracks with determined independence. "Tommy!" Nico rushed to the boy's side, checking for injuries or signs of distress. "What are you doing here? Does your mother know where you are?" "I ran away," Tommy announced with the gravity of someone making an important declaration. "You can't run away, buddy. Your mom will be worried sick. I'm not going back until you promise you won't close the garage." The statement hit Nico like a physical blow. He'd been careful not to discuss the foreclosure in front of Tommy, but children had ways of absorbing adult anxieties that bypassed direct communication. What makes you think the garage is closing?" "I heard Mama talking on the phone about mortgage payments and legal notices. And you look sad all the time now, even when you're pretending to be happy." Tommy's perceptive analysis continued with devastating accuracy. "Plus, you keep looking at everything like you're saying goodbye." Nico knelt beside Tommy's wheelchair, overwhelmed by the boy's insight and touched by his concern. In 3 months, this remarkable child had become the bright spot in every day, the reminder that teaching and learning could transcend any obstacle. "Sometimes adults have problems that are hard to solve," Nico said carefully. "Like when I need surgery, but we have to wait for the right doctor. Something like that. But Mama always finds solutions eventually. She says there's always a way if you're creative enough and willing to ask for help." Before Nico could respond, Isabel's SUV screeched into the parking lot. She emerged in a state of controlled panic, relief and exasperation warring on her face as she spotted her son safe in the garage. "Thomas Michael Klein, you scared me half to death." She crossed the space between them in quick strides, checking him for injuries while simultaneously expressing maternal fury. "You cannot disappear like that. I've had security teams searching the entire neighborhood." "I had to come," Tommy said with stubborn determination. "Nico needs us, and we're not helping him enough." Isabel's attention shifted to Nico, noting his haggard appearance, the defeat in his posture, the legal document visible on his desk. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "What's happened?" Nico hesitated, but Tommy answered with characteristic directness. "The bank is going to take the garage away because Nico doesn't have enough money for the mortgage." "Is that true?" Isabel asked quietly. Nico nodded, too exhausted to maintain pretenses. 30 days to bring 6 months of payments current, plus penalties and legal fees. It's impossible." Isabel picked up the eviction notice, scanning its contents with the quick comprehension of someone accustomed to legal documents. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she absorbed the details. This is what you've been dealing with while I was conducting my research project. Among other things. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help?" "Because I don't want charity. Because accepting handouts would make me feel like a failure. Because—" Nico stopped, recognizing the futility of pride in the face of imminent disaster. Tommy had been listening with growing agitation. "This is stupid. Mama has lots of money. Nico needs money. I need Nico to keep teaching me about cars. Why can't we just fix this?" "It's not that simple, sweetheart," Isabel said gently. "Why not? You fixed Elena's hospital bills." "That was different." "How?" The 8-year-old's logic was unassailable. Isabel had demonstrated her willingness to intervene financially when medical emergencies threatened the family's well-being. The mortgage crisis was equally threatening, equally beyond Nico's ability to resolve through honest labor alone. Because, Nico said heavily, accepting that kind of help would change everything. It would make me dependent on your mother's generosity instead of my own effort. But you wouldn't be dependent, Tommy argued with startling sophistication. You'd be partners. Like when I help you with repairs, I need your knowledge. You need my small hands to reach tight spaces, different abilities, working together. The comparison struck both adults into momentary silence. Tommy had identified something neither had quite articulated, that meaningful partnership required mutual benefit, not charity flowing in one direction. What if it wasn't charity? Isabel asked slowly. What if it was an investment in something larger than saving one garage? What do you mean? The program I've been envisioning. Automotive education centers that combine professional training with inclusive teaching methods. Places where children like Tommy can learn alongside typically developing peers, where physical limitations don't prevent intellectual growth. Nico felt a familiar stirring of excitement, quickly tempered by practical concerns. That sounds like a beautiful dream, but dreams don't pay mortgages. They do, if you structure them as business partnerships rather than charitable donations. Isabel's voice grew more animated as she outlined her vision. Franchise operations with standardized curricula, trained instructors, accessibility modifications, corporate partnerships with automotive manufacturers. You're talking about giving up everything I've built here. I'm talking about taking everything you've built here and sharing it with thousands of families who need exactly what you've given Tommy. Tommy had been following their conversation with intense concentration. Would I still get to learn from you, Nico? Even if everything changes? You'll always be my first student, Nico promised. But buddy, I need to think about all this. It's a lot to consider. How much time do you have? Isabel asked, glancing at the eviction notice. 23 days. Then we need to move quickly. I can cover the mortgage payments immediately, but the partnership proposal will require legal documentation, site planning, curriculum development. Wait. Nico held up his hand, overwhelmed by the pace of her planning. I haven't agreed to anything yet. But you will, Tommy said with absolute confidence, because helping people is what you do, and this would let you help lots more people. As they prepared to leave, Tommy reluctantly accepting that running away was not an acceptable negotiating tactic, Isabel made one final observation. You know, I've been conducting due diligence on you for months. Maybe it's time you conducted some on me. She handed him a thick folder filled with corporate reports, financial statements, charitable foundation summaries, and media coverage spanning years of business operations. Everything you might want to know about Klein Industries, my personal history, and the resources available for ventures I believe in. That night, Nico sat in his small apartment, reading about the woman who had entered his life as a customer needing routine repairs. The documents painted a picture of extraordinary success built on innovative thinking, strategic risk-taking, and genuine commitment to social responsibility. But more revealing were the smaller details, the scholarship programs for disabled students, the inclusive hiring practices, the corporate culture that valued individual dignity over profit maximization. As dawn approached, Nico realized he was facing more than a business decision. He was choosing between the safety of familiar limitations and the terrifying possibility of unprecedented impact. The choice would define not only his future, but the kind of man he intended to be when tested by opportunity instead of adversity. Outside his window, Maple Street prepared for another ordinary day, unaware that extraordinary change was about to reshape one of its most steadfast institutions. The handshake happened at 7 o'clock on a Friday morning, witnessed only by the rising sun streaming through the garage's grimy windows. Nico had spent the night reading Isabel's corporate documents, studying financial projections, and wrestling with the biggest decision of his life. When she arrived with Tommy and 2 cups of coffee, he was ready with his answer. "I have conditions," he said without preamble. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," Isabel replied, settling into the chair beside his father's old desk. Tommy had wheeled himself directly to the parts inventory, continuing his self-appointed mission to categorize every component in the garage. His cheerful humming provided background music to the most important negotiation of Nico's career. First condition: this stays a partnership, not an acquisition. I won't be your employee, and I won't be your charity case. Agreed. Equal partners in all operational decisions. Second, the original shop stays operational. This neighborhood needs automotive service, and I won't abandon the people who've supported my family for 30 years. The flagship location makes perfect sense from a marketing perspective. Third, Elena stays upstairs, and the apartment remains our family home. This expansion can't cost my mother her security. Of course, we'll need her wisdom anyway. Someone has to keep us grounded in practical reality. Nico studied Isabel's face, searching for signs of reluctance or calculation. Instead, he found genuine enthusiasm and something that looked like relief, as if she'd been hoping he would demand exactly these concessions. Fourth condition, he continued. Tommy remains involved in every aspect of the program development, not as a mascot or inspiration, but as a genuine consultant whose insights shape how we design inclusive education. That's the most important condition of all, Isabel agreed. Tommy's perspective is irreplaceable. From across the garage, the boy looked up from his cataloging project. Are you talking about me? We're talking about how smart you are and how much we need your help, Nico called back. I already knew that, Tommy replied with characteristic confidence, returning to his work. The adults shared a laugh that broke the tension of formal negotiations. But Nico had one more requirement, the most difficult to articulate, but the most essential to his peace of mind. Final condition: if this partnership changes who I am as a person, if success makes me forget the values my father taught me, I want the right to walk away and return to this garage with no obligations or ill will. Isabel considered this carefully. That's asking me to invest millions of dollars in something you might abandon if you decide you don't like the results. Yes, that's a terrible business proposition. Probably. It's also the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me in a professional context. She extended her hand across the desk. Partners? Nico gripped her hand firmly, feeling the weight of commitment and possibility in that simple gesture. Partners. The handshake sealed more than a business agreement. It represented the convergence of two different worlds, the merging of small-scale compassion with large-scale resources, the transformation of a neighborhood garage into something that could impact thousands of lives. So what happens now? Nico asked. Now we save your shop, design the program, and change how people think about disability and potential. Isabel pulled out her phone and began making notes. I'll have my legal team draft partnership agreements, my financial people will handle the mortgage payments, and my development team will start scouting locations for additional centers. How long will all this take? The legal and financial pieces, 2 weeks maximum. The program development, that depends on how quickly we can translate your teaching methods into replicable curricula. Tommy had finished his parts inventory and wheeled himself over to join their conversation. When do I get to help design the new places? Starting immediately, Isabel said. We'll need your input on accessibility features, teaching tools, space layouts, everything that makes learning environments work for students with different abilities. What about other kids like me? Will they get to help too? That's the goal. Every center will include student advisors who help us understand what works and what doesn't. Nico felt a familiar warmth spreading through his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced when Tommy first showed genuine interest in automotive mechanics. But this time, the scope was exponentially larger. Instead of teaching one exceptional child, he would have the opportunity to reach hundreds, maybe thousands of young people who needed someone to see their potential rather than their limitations. There's something else, Isabel said, her tone growing more serious. This partnership will attract attention, media coverage, industry scrutiny, probably some criticism from people who don't understand what we're trying to accomplish. What kind of criticism? The usual complaints about throwing money at problems, about enabling dependency instead of encouraging independence, about political correctness run amok. She paused. Are you prepared for that level of public attention? Nico thought about his quiet life on Maple Street, the anonymity he'd always treasured, the simple satisfaction of helping neighbors with their transportation needs. Becoming a public figure would mean sacrificing privacy, accepting scrutiny, defending choices to people who didn't understand his motivations. Will the criticism help us reach more kids who need what we're offering? Probably. Controversy generates awareness, and awareness brings families who might not otherwise know about our services. Then I can handle criticism. Tommy had been listening with the intense concentration he applied to mechanical problems. Will people say mean things about me too? The question hit both adults like a physical blow. They'd been focused on business implications, forgetting that their 8-year-old partner would also face public scrutiny, potential ridicule, the burden of representing disabled children in a highly visible program. Some people might, Isabel said honestly, but for every person who says something thoughtless, there will be 10 families grateful that you helped create opportunities for their children. Like when kids at school used to stare at my wheelchair, but now they ask if they can try riding in it. Exactly like that. Sometimes attention that starts as curiosity becomes understanding. Nico watched Tommy process this information with remarkable maturity. The boy had faced challenges his entire life that most adults never encountered, developing wisdom and resilience that surpassed many people twice his age. I think I can handle mean people if it helps other kids, Tommy decided. Besides, I'll have you and Mama to help me figure out what to say. Yes, you will, Nico promised. We're all in this together. As morning progressed into afternoon, the garage filled with activity that felt different from routine automotive repair. Isabel made phone calls to lawyers, architects, and educational consultants. Tommy worked on design sketches for the ideal inclusive learning environment. Nico found himself thinking beyond individual repairs to systematic approaches that could benefit entire communities. But underneath the excitement and planning, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Thousands of families would eventually depend on decisions he would help make. Children would trust him with their dreams and aspirations. Parents would invest hope in programs he would help design. The small garage that had sheltered 3 generations of Alvarez men was about to become the cornerstone of something unprecedented. Success would bring opportunities he'd never imagined. Failure would disappoint people he hadn't even met yet. As the sun set over Maple Street, casting long shadows through the garage doors, Nico stood, surrounded by the tools and memories that had shaped his life. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and contracts, architects and consultants, the beginning of a transformation that would change everything while hopefully preserving what mattered most. The weathered toolbox sat on the workbench where his father had left it, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The new sign arrived on a Wednesday morning, painted in deep blue letters that matched the original but included the additional words "Associates" beneath the familiar Alvarez Auto Repair. Nico stood in the parking lot with Tommy and Isabel, watching 2 workers position the sign exactly where his father's original had hung for 37 years. "It looks perfect," Tommy declared, bouncing slightly in his wheelchair with excitement. "Now everyone will know this is where the teaching happens." 3 weeks had passed since their handshake agreement, and the transformation was already visible. The garage had been expanded to include a classroom area with accessible workstations, state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, and educational displays that explained automotive systems in terms any age could understand. But the heart of the operation remained unchanged: the same tools, the same workbench, the same commitment to treating every customer with dignity and respect. Elena had watched the changes with a mixture of pride and bemusement from her upstairs window. "My son, the famous teacher," she'd said that morning over breakfast. "Your father would be so proud he'd probably cry." The first official class was scheduled for the following Monday, 8 students ranging in age from 6 to 16, including 3 children with various physical limitations. Tommy had insisted on being the youngest participant, arguing that his experience gave him unique qualifications to help newer students navigate the learning process. "Are you nervous?" Isabel asked as they walked through the expanded facility one final time before the grand opening. "Terrified," Nico admitted. "Teaching one child is completely different from running a structured program. What if I can't replicate what worked with Tommy?" "You'll figure it out. You always do." Tommy had wheeled himself to the main workstation, where a partially disassembled engine waited for Monday's first lesson. "Nico, will you teach the new kids about how pistons work like you taught me?" "That's the plan, buddy. And will you let them help with real repairs, not just practice exercises?" "If they're ready for it, absolutely." Tommy's face lit up with satisfaction. Over the past months, he'd become Nico's unofficial assistant instructor, helping to design curricula, suggesting modifications for accessibility, and providing insights that no adult could have generated. His confidence had grown exponentially, but more importantly, his ability to see potential in other children had become one of the program's most valuable assets. The phone rang constantly, now parents calling from across the region, social workers seeking placement options, educators wanting to study their methods. Media attention had been largely positive, focusing on the innovative approach to inclusive education and the heartwarming story of a neighborhood mechanic whose compassion had attracted corporate partnership. But success brought pressures Nico was still learning to navigate. Corporate lawyers required contracts for everything that had once been handled with handshakes. Insurance companies demanded documentation of safety procedures that had once been common sense. Government regulators wanted proof of compliance with educational standards that had never applied to automotive repair shops. "Sometimes I miss when it was just you, me, and broken carburetors," Nico told Tommy as they reviewed lesson plans for the upcoming week. "But now there are going to be lots more kids who get to feel smart about fixing things," Tommy replied. "That's better than just us having fun, right?" The simple observation reminded Nico why they'd undertaken this expansion in the first place. His relationship with Tommy had been transformative for both of them, but it had also been exclusive. Now they had the opportunity and responsibility to share that experience with families who desperately needed what they'd discovered by accident. Isabel had been working with architectural firms to design 5 additional centers across the metropolitan area. Each location would maintain the community garage atmosphere while incorporating the educational and accessibility features they'd developed at the original site. The goal was to create a network of learning environments where children could discover their mechanical aptitude regardless of physical limitations or economic circumstances. "The Phillips family called again," Isabel reported, checking her messages. "Their daughter Sarah is excited about starting next week, but the parents are worried about whether she'll fit in." Sarah Phillips was a 12-year-old with spina bifida who'd been told repeatedly that automotive work was unsuitable for someone with her physical limitations. Her parents had been skeptical about enrolling her in the program until Tommy had spoken with them directly, explaining how he'd learned to adapt tools and techniques to work around his wheelchair. "She'll fit in perfectly," Tommy said with absolute confidence. "I've been thinking about modifications we could make to the lift controls so she can operate them independently." This was Tommy's gift, the ability to see solutions where others saw obstacles, to envision adaptations that preserved dignity while accommodating limitations. His insights had become integral to every aspect of program development, from physical space design to instructional methodology. As afternoon faded into evening, the 3 partners sat in the expanded office area, reviewing student files and finalizing preparations for Monday's launch. Each child represented a family's hopes, a story of challenges overcome or still being navigated, a test of whether their inclusive approach could truly deliver on its promises. "What if we fail?" Nico asked, voicing the fear that had kept him awake for the past week. "Then we learn from our mistakes and try again," Isabel replied. "But we won't fail, because we're building on something that already works." How can you be so confident? Because I've watched you teach my son for months. I've seen him transform from a child who felt different and limited to a young man who sees himself as capable and valuable. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because of your approach, your values, your ability to see potential where others see problems. Tommy had been sketching modifications for Sarah's workstation, but he looked up at the mention of his own transformation. I was never really different, Nico. I just needed someone to notice that my brain works the same as everyone else's. The comment struck Nico with unexpected force. Tommy was right. The boy's intelligence, creativity, and enthusiasm had always been there, waiting for someone to recognize and nurture them. What Nico had provided wasn't magical teaching ability, but simply the respect and attention every child deserved. That's what we're really offering, Nico realized. Not specialized education for disabled children, but good education that happens to be accessible to everyone. Exactly. Isabel agreed. Universal design principles applied to automotive education. It benefits everyone, but it's essential for children who've been excluded from traditional programs. As they locked up the garage and prepared to go their separate ways, Nico felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety that preceded any significant challenge. Monday would test everything they'd planned, everything they believed about inclusive education, everything they hoped to accomplish for families like the Phillips. But standing beneath the new sign that proclaimed their partnership to the neighborhood, surrounded by the tools and memories that connected him to his father's legacy, Nico felt something else, sense of rightness, of purpose, fulfilled rather than abandoned. The garage had evolved, but its heart remained unchanged. They were still fixing things that were broken, helping people solve problems, providing services that improved daily life. The scale was larger, the impact potentially greater, but the fundamental mission was identical to what Miguel Alvarez had established 37 years ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to prove that kindness and competence could coexist, that limitations didn't define potential, that every child deserved someone who believed in their ability to learn and grow and contribute. The weathered toolbox sat ready on the expanded workbench, surrounded by newer equipment, but still holding the tools that had built this dream, one satisfied customer at a time. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after the program's launch, handwritten on lined notebook paper in the careful script of a teenager, learning to express complex thoughts. Nico read it twice before calling Tommy and Isabel to share the words that had moved him to tears. Dear Mr. Alvarez, the letter began. My name is Marcus Rodriguez, and I graduated from your automotive program last month. I wanted to thank you for teaching me that being in a wheelchair doesn't mean I can't fix engines. Because of what I learned at your garage, I got accepted to the technical college with a full scholarship. I'm going to be an automotive engineer, and someday I'm going to design cars that work better for people like us. Thank you for seeing what I could do instead of what I couldn't do. Your student, Marcus. Tommy beamed with pride as Nico finished reading. At 9 years old, he'd become the program's unofficial ambassador, welcoming new students, sharing adaptation techniques, and demonstrating that physical limitations didn't limit intellectual potential. His confidence had inspired dozens of children who'd arrived convinced that automotive work was beyond their capabilities. Marcus was scared on his first day, Tommy remembered. He thought everyone would stare at his wheelchair, but by the end of the week, he was teaching other kids how to organize tools efficiently. The program had exceeded everyone's expectations. All 5 locations were operating at capacity, with waiting lists that stretched months into the future. More importantly, the educational outcomes validated everything they'd hoped to achieve. Students with physical limitations consistently outperformed national averages in mechanical comprehension, spatial reasoning, and problem-solving skills. Elena watched the celebrations from her kitchen window, her health stable under careful medical management. At 73, she'd become the program's unofficial grandmother, offering advice to parents, cookies to students, and wisdom to anyone facing challenges that seemed insurmountable. "Your father knew this would happen," she told Nico as they reviewed graduation photos from the latest class. "He always said you had teacher's hands, even when you were Tommy's age." The original garage continued operating as both educational center and community auto repair shop. Regular customers like Pete Martinez had become program supporters, volunteering their time to help with advanced repairs while students observed and learned. The neighborhood had embraced the expansion, proud to be headquarters for an initiative that was attracting national attention. Isabel had proven herself an ideal partner, providing resources and corporate expertise while respecting Nico's insistence on maintaining the program's community-centered values. Her business background had been essential for scaling operations, but her personal investment remained focused on ensuring that every child received the same quality of attention Tommy had experienced. "We have a problem," she announced during their weekly planning meeting, though her tone suggested good news rather than crisis. "What kind of problem?" Nico asked. "The Department of Education wants to fund a national expansion, 50 locations over 3 years, with federal support for curriculum development and instructor training." Tommy looked up from his newest design project, a comprehensive tool organization system that accommodated various physical limitations. "That sounds like a good problem. It would mean going nationwide, working with government bureaucrats, accepting oversight and regulation we've managed to avoid so far," Isabel explained. Nico considered the implications. Federal funding would provide stability and reach they couldn't achieve independently, but it would also transform their grassroots program into a government initiative with all the complications that entailed. "What do you think, Tommy? You're the one who started all this by asking intelligent questions about carburetors." "I think there are probably lots of kids in other states who need what we have here," Tommy replied with characteristic thoughtfulness. "But I also think we should make sure we don't change the important parts just because we get bigger." The wisdom of a 9-year-old cut straight to the heart of their dilemma. Growth was desirable only if it preserved the qualities that made their program special: individual attention, genuine respect, the belief that every child possessed untapped potential. "We'll accept the federal partnership," Nico decided, "but with conditions that protect our core values. No bureaucrat gets to tell us how to treat students, and no regulation gets to override our commitment to seeing potential before limitations." As autumn arrived on Maple Street, the garage bustled with activity that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Students worked alongside paying customers, learning automotive repair while contributing to the shop's operation. The integration was seamless for everyone, understood they were part of something larger than individual transactions or educational exercises. Mrs. Patterson arrived for her monthly oil change, greeting student mechanics by name and inquiring about their progress. The Rodriguez family brought their van for winter preparation, staying to watch their youngest daughter practice brake inspections under Tommy's patient guidance. Pete Martinez had become a regular volunteer, his decades of mechanical experience invaluable for teaching advanced diagnostic techniques. "It's exactly what your father envisioned," Elena told Nico, as they watched the controlled chaos of education and commerce blending seamlessly. "A place where people help each other solve problems." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, a young woman in business attire, who parked a late-model sedan and approached with the careful politeness of someone unsure of her welcome. She introduced herself as Dr. Jennifer Chen, recently appointed director of the state's new Office of Inclusive Education. "I wanted to see for myself what everyone's talking about," she explained. "The federal reviewers were unanimous. They've never encountered a program that achieves this level of integration between students with different abilities." Nico gave her the standard tour, explaining their teaching methods, demonstrating adaptive equipment, introducing her to current students. But Dr. Chen's attention focused most intently on the interactions between children, how those with physical limitations naturally mentored newcomers. How typically developing students sought advice from wheelchair users who'd mastered complex adaptation techniques. "This is remarkable," she said as they concluded the visit. "You've created an environment where disability becomes a form of expertise rather than a limitation." "We haven't created anything," Nico replied. "We've just stopped getting in the way of what these kids were always capable of achieving." As evening approached and the day's last student departed with grease-stained hands and a proud smile, the three partners gathered in the office to review progress and plan tomorrow's lessons. The walls were covered with photographs, now graduating students, successful repairs, moments of breakthrough and achievement that captured the program's impact. "Do you ever miss the quiet days?" Isabel asked, "when it was just you and routine repairs?" "Sometimes," Nico admitted. "But then I think about Marcus getting that scholarship, or Sarah Phillips designing her accessible tool cart, or Tommy becoming the confident young man he is today. The quiet was peaceful, but this is meaningful." Tommy had been working on a letter to Marcus, sharing news about program expansion and updates from mutual friends. His handwriting had improved dramatically, his vocabulary grown sophisticated, his confidence expanded to match his considerable abilities. "Nico," he said, looking up from his writing, "do you think my dad would be proud of what we're doing here?" The question surprised both adults. Tommy rarely mentioned his father, who'd been absent from his life since early childhood. But clearly, the boy thought about paternal approval, about family legacy, about making someone proud of his achievements. "I think any father would be incredibly proud of you," Nico said carefully. "You've helped create something that's changing lives across the country. But I think he'd be most proud that you never let anyone make you feel small or limited or less capable than you really are," Isabel added. "That's the most important lesson of all." As they locked up the garage and prepared to go home, Nico paused beneath the sign that now proclaimed their partnership to the world. The neighborhood had settled into familiar evening rhythms, but everything was different now. Children with disabilities were learning that their dreams were valid. Parents were discovering that limitations didn't define potential. Communities were recognizing that inclusion strengthened everyone. The weathered toolbox sat ready for tomorrow's challenges, surrounded by evidence of what could happen when one person decided to treat a child with dignity and respect. From that simple beginning had grown a movement that was reshaping how society thought about disability, ability, and the untapped potential that existed in every human being. Miguel Alvarez's garage had become something larger than he'd ever imagined, but it remained true to the values he'd instilled, that every person deserved to be treated with dignity, that honest work was its own reward, and that helping others solve their problems was the highest calling anyone could pursue. Sometimes the most powerful moments happened when someone was watching, when kindness was witnessed and amplified, when a single act of genuine respect rippled outward to change countless lives in ways that could never be fully measured but would never be forgotten.